Okay. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're joined by Timo Pagel, and we'll have a session on abuse test for developers. So over to you, Timo.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I would like to give you some background, what I understand about testing, what projects, or to be more precise, developers or people who write code. It can also be IT people who are operating systems and do it via infrastructure as code, what they should test. So I will give you some background information, what tests are there in general, and then we will come to security related tests. I never gave this presentation before, so I would be very happy in case you have feedback. So how do you handle these different types of tests? What do you use at your company, and what are your personal experiences with it? So that we have a discussion here. So whenever you have a thought about something, please directly share it with everyone here. So it's not intended that I just speak for 30 minutes and then afterwards we have questions. It's better when we do it directly within the presentation. I'm Timo Pagel. I'm located in Hamburg. And I am a freelancer, so I participate in a lot of open source projects. So I love open source and open knowledge. That's why I give this presentation. The agenda for today is here. Um, One question to the moderator: are people able to talk, or can they just write in the chat?
Oh, they can just write in the chat. For
Okay.
security reasons, we disable the um, voice. But then after the session, we're going to unmute them all, and they can ask
Okay.
questions.
Then I have to say it in a different way. So whenever you have something which you feel would be valuable, please write it in the chat. Otherwise, we will have the discussion afterwards. So I will give you around 30 to 40 minutes presentation here, and afterwards we talk about it. And I'm interested in your experiences. In case you see the video afterwards, after this session, you're also able to write an email to me. The email will be in the end listed here on the slide, so that you can also share your experiences there, or submit a pull request. But that wouldn't be a question, right? When you have questions or experiences, you can't share it on the Open Security Summit page. Okay, then we go ahead. So this is the agenda for today. So we start with an introduction about tests in general. We talk about test sources. So what are the sources for tests in general? Can you identify security-related tests? How can you create security-related tests? What is the strategy of implementing tests? Because there are so many different types. How do you start? And in the end, we have a summary. So I'm looking forward to give you this introduction. So we start with an introduction. When I talk about tests, I'm in a DevOps environment. And in a DevOps environment, we have multiple services. Service A, B, C, D, for example. So this is a very short introduction in DevOps. We have these various services and deploy them multiple times. So that is the circle here, or deployment very often. And after every deployment of a service, an attacker has the ability to test these for new vulnerabilities, for new threats, and might be able to exploit it in case we have integrated. There are some. Actually, when we see the picture here, they are mostly not aligned, the deployments. They are a bit from different services. So they are over time, service A deploys it, and other times than service B. So that makes it even more complicated when you have services in dev where one calls another one. And what is it what we need to do? We need to add continuous testing. For sure, this mostly can't be a replacement for a full penetration test, but it will give you some insurance, a baseline, maybe a bit more than a baseline, so that you can feel more secure because you have tested well with various scenarios. So this is a presentation also for developers. So I will give you a bit of background what to test, and we start with a car. So what is the first thing you do after entering your car? Maybe you can participate in the chat and write what is it what you do first? What is the task at hand you do when you enter a car? Turn on engine, okay. That is one comment here. Check mirrors, okay, yeah, there is someone thinking about security. Fasten seatbelt also is security. Measure, put on seatbelt, exactly. So that are different things we are doing. Close the door is also a good option before you start to drive. So so we had checking the mirrors. So that is already, I would say, a security feature you're doing there. You hope maybe have learned this during your while you made your license for the car driving, that you have to check mirrors. So that is a security related action. Also, fasten the seatbelt, that is an example I chose here, is something you directly do. So I would call that visible security. So that is something that the customer actually sees that there is security and that it's required. My car, for example, starts to beep when I didn't fasten the seatbelt. So there are security features which you can actually see, but obviously a car has much more security features which we don't see. So for example, we have an airbag. So the airbag is just there. We don't check it so much. I think I have somewhere a light for the airbag, but that's it. I couldn't say where it is. So that is something which is invisible for me as a customer. So what comes naturally are the security features which we see, so that comes more handy to us. But we don't think about an airbag, so that is just there. The manufacturer included it. It's non-visible security for us. So as a tester, we need to include visible and invisible security into our products and obviously test it. So we need to test these things. To test it, there are different types of testing which you might know. There is a positive testing, which is easier to think about. So for example, when we think about access management, we can have a scenario to see if a user logs in successful and the credentials are correct. And negative testing is a bit more hard, I feel. So you need to think about what can go wrong. So we validate the user is not allowed to access when the credentials are entered incorrect. These are the two examples I just gave you. So we have the positive and the negative type, which we have to test. We're still in the introduction phase here. So when you talk about tests, in general, so not security related, you often see this pyramid. So you have unit tests, where you test, for example, a public interface of a class. So you have a public method in a class and you test that. That is the recommended minimum. You also have private classes, which you private methods, which you might want to check. But the minimum here, which is mostly recommended, are public. The public interfaces, that at least that is checked with unit tests. They are, as you can see here, this shows the amount in the pyramid that should be the most of the tests you have is the unit tests. Afterwards, you do some integration tests. So you put these things together. So the contract between services, for example, you can test with integration tests. An example is that you can test a fan in a toilet, that it will dry your hands, and you can have a test for garbage bin where you put in papers after you dried it, and both can be successful. But when you unfortunately put the garbage bin under the fan to dry your hands, that will become a mess, right? Because you put something in and automatically the fan will turn on and blow into the bin and maybe blows the used papers back to you. So that's why you need an integration test too. Then you might have UI tests where you actually test the UI, so the graphical interface. For example, you can have an Angular app and you can test when I click here, that should happen. So that is mostly the happy task, the happy path, which is tested as seen as what I have seen so far, that you test the happy path and not the things which are not expected so often. And then obviously you have in addition manual tests. So that is where someone performs the testing for some scenarios which are very, very unlikely. So you don't want to automate testing. So now we come to different test sources. To be more precise, we now go into the direction of security, so security test sources. This is my point of view. I didn't read this in a paper. So in case you have more sources for tests, please write it in the chat or afterwards presented in the conversation. So my sources, the sources I have for tests in my daily use, in my daily work life, is threat modeling. So in threat modeling, I hope everyone knows threat modeling. I try to summarize it. You ask the question, what can go wrong? And based on that, in the design phase, you create attack scenarios. And when you have these scenarios, then you can test for it. Then you might have learnings, like a misuse feature, which you have in production, so that you can, which got misused already, and then you have the learning, and you can say, okay, we don't want that this happens again, so we have a test for this specific vulnerability, for example, and that this doesn't happen again. And then you have a test or reports, like you made a full penetration test, you get a report in the hand, and then you have the report. This is already very good structured mostly, and you have the proofs that it's actually something is exploitable, and then you can write test suites that it doesn't happen again. For example, what can be there is a header, which is mentioned, which you should have, and then you can test afterwards, after the implementation, that the application does serve this header. Here is a comment from Michael. I usually use the use cases for finding app users. Yeah, exactly. I will try visualize that in a few slides. The final goal from my point of view are automated tests. For sure, you need to have a high degree of trust in your automated tests, at least in case you want to take actions when the test fails. But from my point of view, to automate tests should be the ultimate goal. But for sure, not every test will be automated. Some tests might be only performed manually. In threat modeling, we face, or I face at least the problem that you can argue that are all theoretical threats that might never happen to us because the likelihood is so low. While with the learnings and the pen test, it's proven that it is actually exploitable. In threat modeling, that we might also discuss things which might not be so easy exploitable, but with the learnings and the test reports, there is something which has been exploited. So you should consider a bit more to add test cases for that, which are in the best case automated. So in threat modeling, we have to ask the question, what is the value of implementing the test? So that is hopefully fully answered by the threat modeling itself. And then also we have to take into account what is the effort of testing this, because there might be scenarios where you need 60 days to implement a test that might not be worth it, depending on the value which we gave to as a test. Then we also have the learning and the test report. There, from my point of view, the value is mostly proven. So we mainly talk about the effort. So what is how is the effort to do it? And we also get from these so at least from pen tests we get already they already rated the threat which is given. Then we come to the identification of tests. Oh, 1 second. There is from Mario comment. I normally derive abuse cases from threat modeling exercise. Yeah, exactly. I want to come to that now. What is the best case to identify tests? So that we have learnings hopefully doesn't happen too often to us, and also a pen test you do mostly only once in a year, or at some companies a bit more often, and in some companies a bit less often. So the tool at hand is threat modeling. Threat modeling asks you try to answer the questions in a structured approach. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job? And I have tried to map this a bit to testing. So what are we working on? So that is a description of the business feature, for example. Then the question, what can go wrong? So that is the enumeration of the possible attacks. Then you might perform a risk rating, you filter, you perform a filtering of the tests. And here is where you might also start to do it as abuse.
Please unmute.
Wasn't I? Why did you mute me?
Sorry, it was just a click accidentally when someone.
Okay. All
Sorry
right.
about that.
So now I'm not muted anymore. I'm not sure where you heard where I got muted. What was one of the last things I said? I think we've been at what can go wrong. So that is where we start to create app use cases, for example. And then we come to the question, what are we going to do about it? So you need to find a prevention, and you should consider to write tests for that prevention mechanism. There are different things where I would write different tests. I will come to that later. And then after threat modeling, you always ask the question, did we do a good enough job? So can the process itself be optimized? Or you can ask the question, are all tests still green, which we have created, and are they all automated? Okay, then here is just example. So you have the business feature. We need to hand out discount coupons for our shop. Then one team member should ask maybe the security champion, what can go wrong here? And then another team member claims that as an evil user, I stake multiple coupons to receive money for buying items. So that is one of the worst cases here. So that shouldn't happen. As we have heard in the comments already from Michael, it is a good approach to create user stories, and for the user stories you create these app use stories. So what can go wrong? I have a lot of customers in the insurance industry, so that's why we see here an example from the insurance industry. As an insurer, I change my bank and want to update my bank account in the app. As an EVA user, I want to change the bank account of users to an bank. I'm not sure how to say this in English. That's why I say bank account. IBAN maybe are controlled by me. Therefore, I manipulate the user ID and request to update all stored IBANs of users. So the you have the user story described as a user story, and you describe the evil story here in the same way. I personally do this only in the case I know that non-technical people have to deal with it. Otherwise, for me, it's mostly a technical task. So here we see an extended example. So you have the abuse stories. You create a task with this abuse story after you created the control for it, or the measurement against it. Then here the same thing, and here you have here you talk about a security feature. So what you need is here also multiple tests. As I said, you might sometimes don't want to describe it with an abuse story, because when it's about an header, from my point of view, sometimes you don't need to make the effort to describe it like here. When you have technical people, it might be enough to say, please add a content security policy and don't describe it all like this. That really depends, from my point of view, at the target audience. For me, when it is management, I describe it like this, because otherwise I will have to talk too much. When I'm talking with technical people, then I describe more what has to be performed, and not so much this story, like a story. Also, you might need thread libraries to actually be able to identify different threads. So one option is the practical security stories and security tasks for agile development environments from Safecode. Or you, depending on the scope you have, you might also have other security articles. When you're more in infrastructure area, for example, Kubernetes, you might consider sys benchmarks or other sources, so that you are able to identify threats, because maybe you don't have everything in your head. Now we come to the creation of tests. So here I have another example. We need to hand out discount coupons for a shop. What can go wrong? And the answer here is, as an EVA user, I perform an SQL injection to receive all coupons in the database. So now we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to ask this question every time I have a service which is dealing with a database? And do we have to write manual tests to it? So are we actually capable of writing tests to it? That is also a question I would ask. Are we expert enough with SQL injection to write tests to it? So one option is that you create a generic thread list for all applications of a specific type, like you have Java services, which with specific frameworks, with specific stack. Then such a generic thread list would help, from my point of view. And then the question is, how do you test it? And this is so generic that I wouldn't try to do it by myself. I would rather automate a tool like Overstep or Burp, or other tools like SQL Map, which are specialized in this. And this brings me to different test types. One option is dynamic application security testing with, for example, Overstep. Another one is static application security testing, where you don't execute the target. So in dynamic application security testing, you execute the environment, and then you perform tests against this, while in static application security testing, you do it, for example, on the source code or on a binary, so that you don't need to execute it. Then we have software composition analysis. So you perform an origin analysis to identify known vulnerabilities in the different dependencies you include, mainly open source projects. And then in addition, you have the application tests which you write by yourself. So you write, for example, unit tests, component integration, acceptance, and or smoke tests, which are mostly written by yourself. So for the others that are big topics, which I don't want to go into detail here, I would like to focus on the application tests. So what can we test in our source code? Um, People who know me know that I love the juice shop. So for sure, I will give you some examples from the juice shop. The juice shop is written in JavaScript, and we use TypeScript to write the code. Here is an example with the framework Mocker, and the test is should serve markdown files from folder slash FTP. So here it's getting tested that the file slash FTP slash testmd, which you can see here in the requirement, in the request parameter. And then we use the function serve public file. So this gets tested, and then we here write what we expect. What is the outcome of when we have a request with testmd? So we expect that the send file have been called with FTP slash testmd. So this is a test to first validate the function. With Mocker, you also have other functions. You have functions like before, where you can set up once is set up. For example, you can set up the database. Then you have or start a database. Then you have before each. So before each of these different test scenarios, you execute something. For example, you can create a test user or do other things which you would like to do. And then you have after and after each also. And now we come to the question, what can go wrong? So we ask the question and have to think what can go wrong. Maybe you can write a scenario, what can go wrong? What could we test here for? What could be a test for the use case of serving files in a folder called -FTP? Yeah, exactly. So here already we see there are some security people in the room. Somebody trying to access files outside of FTP, and that is exactly the case we have here. So we have a local file inclusion here, which Mihir said. So the next test here should raise error for slashes in file name. So we have here the case that someone is not only mentioning the file name itself, also these slash, so you can have try to include files from another location. Then we have the same, we serve public files, we see what happens afterwards, so, and then we come to the expect. So what do we expect? We expect that the send file has not been called, and we expect that we have an instance of error here. So that that are our two expectations. So that is a security test. This is the unit test. Even though we manipulate here request parameters, I would call this a unit test. And we can also perform integration tests. In the juice shop, we have Frisbee for that. And what we can do here is get existing basket which contain product ID. So what we do is we call Frisbee, we perform a get request on the REST URL, so that is the URL of the executed juice shop, the running juice shop, and we try to access the basket with the ID 1 here. We give some headers with it because the juice shops requires, for example, authentication headers, which I think also is session ID. And when we do that, we expect the status to Honda at 200. We expect the header. We expect that we get back JSON with ID 1, and that the product length is 3. So now, same question. So what can go wrong? I assume you have a lot of scenarios here. Okay, here is an example. I saw Jean Christophe. I say is trying with ID 2, but it's not allowed. Louis says trying to see the basket of a different users. Exactly. So we can enumerate here the ID, and one use case which is there is a get empty basket when requesting non-existing basket IDs. So we describe here what we expect when it's not existing. For sure, there are also tests for an existing basket of another user. And like this, you describe what you expect. So when I come to a new project and I want to develop in it, I sometimes actually retest first so that I understand what actually this class is about, and then I go and write in the check the code in this class and then add my functionality to it, especially in open source projects. That is very useful, where you dig in for a short time and then go out again. So in addition to security, you also get some kind of documentation for your code. I said already that you need to handle test results. Is there someone saying something? Because I can hear background sound. Now it stopped. Okay. So test results handling, I said already that you should think about handling when a test fails. So you wrote all the tests, you put a lot of effort inside. So you should think about letting a build fail when a test fails. So this obviously requires a high degree of trust in these tests. So in case they are unstable, I wouldn't recommend to block the build, but the target should be to automate it. So it should be stable. It should always give the same result, and therefore you should block the build. So now we come to the test strategy. There is a project called DevSecOps maturity model. There are also other maturity models like the software assurance maturity model. So these are two examples which you can use to have a guideline of which types of tests you implement when. This is a screenshot of the DSIM, the DevSecOps maturity model, where you see here on the left, these are all so-called subdimensions for testing. So the dynamic testing, the static testing, the test intensity, the consolidation of the findings, and application tests. So what I meant, you have seen beforehand with Mocha or Frisbee, for example, with a user and with the unit and integration tests. On the right, you see other DevOps dimensions, which I don't want to go in detail here. And as in every maturity model, you have different levels. So it makes sense to first fill out level 1 and then go to level 2 and then to level 3 and so on. It doesn't make sense to only do one of the subdimensions from my point of view. So that is how you can think about what you do first and what later. So in the first level here, you can, for example, use over SAP manually and you don't automate it. While later on level 2, you have to automate using over SAP, and then you add more more devs in it so that you see more in the application, for example, by adding authorization or by automating to pick up a Zwecker YAML, the definition of the endpoints. All that comes later, but that all takes a lot of time. So that gives you that you can study to get ideas of what to do when. And now we come to the summary. So what is the summary? Use automated test tools, especially for something like SQL injections. Overstep is an example. Find security bugs is an example. Sonar type is an example for commercial tool. Then write your own automated tests. So things which are not covered by these tools. You should write on your own, or in case you say the effort of automating tests is too high, you should write some basic tool, some basic tests, for example, for the SQL injection, and block build in case tests fail, because in case you test and it fails and no one takes a look at it, that is not helpful. Yeah, thank you. Do you have questions? I think now we wanted to stop the recording and let people speak.
If everyone's happy, we'll continue the recording for the questions. If anybody
all
has
right.
any.
Yeah, sure.
It's just that we've had some other interruptions in the past, so we've had to put a blanket. So Elena, if you can let people unmute themselves.
Yeah, everyone is on mute now. They can, they can unmute themselves now.
Okay, thank you.
And they can start their video also if they want.
So not only questions, right? You can also give your comments that you see something in a different way, for example.
If you don't want to ask your question, you can always pop it in the chat and one of us will voice it for Timo.
Everyone is mind blown.
Oh, I don't think there's any questions then.
Hello, this is Louis. I was trying to raise my hand, but I didn't find the button to raise my hand. So I hope it's okay if I join in just like that with my voice.
Yeah, sure.
So I've also been trying to get this rolling, and I think the biggest challenge is how do you share the tests among development teams? I mean, you have a set of requirements which are pretty much the same everywhere, right? So if you're basing yourself on ASDS, for example, you have input requirements, you have file upload requirements, you have things that are more or less standardized set of requirements. So how could you share this across teams so that the effort of implementing this has a chance higher than zero of actually getting somewhere? Because if every team has to do this, I know teams will be arguing, oh no, this is a security thing, I don't have time for this test.
In case it's a function like file upload, I would try to have a team building a library for it, and then try to rely on the quality the team wants to deliver, that they add security tests to it.
Okay,
so
but
my strategy. I would try to do like that. In case it's always kind of the same case, it should be library, and the library should include tests. And then the task is to convince only this one team, which is maintaining that library, to add tests to it. And then my strategy mostly is that I try to rely on their on the quality within the team which they want to deliver to other teams.
Okay.
It doesn't work often. It's not a silver bullet. Some teams are not listening to me, but it helps at least for half of the teams, I would say.
Yeah, I've been working with Mario Platt on these ASVS user stories. I'm not sure if you have heard of it. And what we're trying to do is take the requirements from the application security verification standard and translate them into Gherkin stories for which you can write your tests, given preconditions, when action, then expected outcome, which is basically what you're doing, right?
Yeah, what no, I wouldn't say that is what I'm doing. I'm trying to give this task to the team, and that they ask me when they have questions.
Okay.
Because the other way, it's a burden for them, and in case I don't do it, I have work for nothing. And the other way, they pull me when they need me, so I'm not wasting my time with creating requirements which no one reads. So that is obviously something you can't do in enterprise environments where you have a lot of requirements, maybe or regulations. But in now even there, I would say that there are documents which no one reads in the end, even there. So I'm trying to tell the teams I'm always there for you and give them feedback of how I see their security. And one part of the feedback is the tests. So what I am doing is these automated things. That is something which I see as a service. So that is something I have a team implementing it. Automated tests tool like dynamic testing or interactive security testing, whatever is there, what you want to use. So that is something where I would say the security team should put on the hat on and make sure that teams can easily use it and push them to use it. So I go to the teams and say, hey, don't you want to use a tool? And then they say yes, and then we make a kickoff and I show them how to implement it and so on. But with the application tests which they have to write by themselves, I don't feel that it's helpful when I do something for them. In the start, for example, of threat modeling, when I started, you're doing some kind of threat modeling, yeah, right? So in the start of threat modeling, I documented what happened in this threat modeling for the teams. So I also stopped that because I feel that is something which the team should be encouraged to do it by themselves. In case they can't do it documented way, then I have to do it all the time for them. That can't be the target. The target is that they do most of the stuff, and I help them to find the use cases in case they're willing to.
Sure, but then you need to train them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't work without training. I train them how to do threat modeling. That is a one-day workshop. And I'm there for the first threat modelings. Then they can do it by themselves and only ask me when they have a difficult task. So I don't think that they can cover everything, but they can do 60% of the threat modeling alone, and then with the difficult tasks, we come together and talk about, for example, when it comes to possible mitigations, then I'm often there. Or when it comes to very important applications, I'm also often there when we perform a threat modeling. But half of it they do by themselves without me. I'm not sure if that is better than what you're doing, but that is at least my way.
I mean, it's not in conflict with what you're doing, right? It's just complementary, I would say, because you already have Gherkin stories that are very easy to implement as a test. And in Gherkin, you use a given precondition, when action, then expected outcome. And there are frameworks that basically take Gherkin inputs and you just have to tell them what they should understand with a sentence, and they do the testing. So that simplifies a bit the question. And the ASVS covers a lot of these things that could happen. So if someone managed to have enough prepackaged security requirements ready as a test suite, then you could standardize a bit across all projects running what their security posture is.
Yeah, that's what I'm also trying with automating over SAP to get a baseline.
Sure, but I mean, OWASP can be triggered for this. So if you have seen Blazing Wings, I think it's her name or her handle, she already created for headers and configuration and a couple of things, a couple of scripts for OWASP. So she covers already like 1 or 2 chapters from the ASDS.
Yeah.
So that's one point. And yeah, of course, ASDS does cover a lot of ground. And
Yeah, absolutely. Developers should be aware of it. You can't let them run alone, not knowing such documents.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Very interesting.
Is there any other questions from anyone? No? Well, I think we're done. Obviously, if you do think of any questions, you can more than welcome to contact us on Slack. I'm sure Timo will answer them for you.
Slack. Okay, yeah, sure.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Bye.
Bye.